awesome. Well, it's great to be here today on Planetary Health First, Mars Next. I'm Michael Mann, the host. Have a super amazing entrepreneur, really perfectly fit for our vision. So honored to have you here, Tom. I'd love for you just to, before we get going, please do a quick introduction. I'm sure plenty of people know you and all your vision, what you've done, but just give us a little about you before we begin.
Absolutely. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Really look forward to chatting with you. So my name is Tom. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called TerraCycle. And we are a company with a mission to eliminate the idea of waste. So what we try to do is move from a linear system where we take, make, and throw out things to a circular one, and then progressively more circular. So what we're really known for is recycling things that are traditionally not recyclable, from cigarette butts to chewing gum, from plastic gloves to flexible food packaging. Then we help companies integrate waste back into their production. So we're not just recycling things, but helping companies make their objects from garbage. And then from there, through our loop system, to move to fully reusable products and packages. All of this is in a spirit to eliminate the idea of waste. And I've been running TerraCycle now for 23 years. We're about 500 team members, serving 20 countries nationally in what we do.
Wow. I think this is amazing to have you here, to hear 23 years. Gosh, when you came on the map that in Princeton, it's just cool to see what your journey. I'm sure you never had any idea where you'd be today. But this genesis of you with TerraCycle and just your entrepreneurial spirit is just awesome. So I just want, can we just start where you were at Princeton? You were there as a student trying to tinker and figure out something to take something that was just waste, right? Poop,
Yeah.
and then turn it into nutrients, fertilizer. And, that leap, there's so many people that would love to imagine of being a successful entrepreneur. Can you share just how this happened and just sort of that founder story? I'd love to hear that.
Absolutely. So I think the best context is, I was originally born in Budapest, Hungary, in the early 80s. And that's really only relevant because that was still under the Iron Curtain, part of the USSR, and effectively sort of communist socialist, right? So you couldn't have entrepreneurship the way you have in North America. And when I was 4, Chernobyl happened just next door in the Ukraine, which destabilized the borders. We were able to effectively escape as political refugees. Now I'm 4. This is more my parents' story, but landed in Canada and grew up there, and then came to New Jersey for college. And I mentioned that sort of geographic journey because I went from communism to the heartland of capitalism, and I really fell in love with entrepreneurship at an early age. Started my first business when I was 14. It was a graphic design web type company. Nothing crazy innovative, but for 14 it was pretty cool to run a company. And I think at that time, what drew me to entrepreneurship was more probably egocentric goals, like a good path to fame and fortune, I figured. Then when I came down to Princeton, as one does in university, you become more utopian. And I started, thinking about what's the purpose of business. And, the way it was defined in school was maximize profit to shareholders. And to me, that felt a little vapid, right? It didn't feel all that fulfilling. Is profit the purpose, or maybe it's an indicator of health, meaning that it is critical, right? If you're not healthy as a company, you're going to go bankrupt and go away. That means if you're not profitable, and if inversely you're profitable, you're going to flourish. But is that the point? And if you more frame it as an indicator of health, then it leaves room for what the company does and how it affects society or the planet to be the point. And can that be a positive thing versus just a negative extractive, type thing? So that was sort of the thought process going through my head. And TerraCycle started as a worm poop company. But much more, it was the beginning of what became a lifelong fascination with waste. The spark for me came when my friends, they were just, they're growing some pot in their basement in Montreal and couldn't really make the plants work. And suddenly they fixed it by taking the organic waste, the kitchen scraps they had, feeding it to red worms, taking the worm poop, feeding it to the plants, which, mind you, was mind blowing for me. But any gardener, would tell you that's pretty, normal and how things work. But what was more interesting was this sort of spark around the fascination of waste, because the first thing that caught my eye was waste is the only material in the world that has negative value. sort of an odd concept. People are willing to pay you to get rid of it. In some countries, in fact, like Japan, that is the legal definition of garbage, a material you're willing to pay to get rid of. And what an interesting starting point, having negative raw material costs for a product. And so but there's all these other weird anomalies that kept emerging. Not only does it have negative value, the garbage industry is the only industry in the world that will one day possess everything you own. That's a big idea. 99% of what we buy will be property of a garbage company within the year of purchase. Yet, for how big of a statement that is, it's also the least innovative industry per dollar of revenue it enjoys, because it is not metaphorically gross. It is like literally gross, you know? So it has, and there's tons of these other anomalies. I'm sure we'll chat about some of them as we talk today. And that was really fascinating, right, to dig into. And it's continued to sort of keep me very engaged for now 2 decades and going. Now, going back to the beginning, that sort of spark was, this, how do we solve garbage and make products? And the first product was worm poop in a used soda bottle. We would take the cafeteria waste from the Princeton dining halls, feed it to worms, take that worm poop, liquefy it, make it into a tea effectively. And then, because we couldn't afford packaging, package it in used soda bottles like old Coke and Pepsi bottles. And that became our first product. In fact, the word TerraCycle is Earth Cycle. That's how it sort of came to be. And the logo, actually, here's an example of worm poop in a used soda bottle. That logo is I drew it as a worm originally. That's sort of how it started, and off we went from there. Ended up leaving school a year later to dedicate myself full time, to the company, and slowly, it started growing, and within a few years, we were national and all the major retailers like Home Depot, Walmart, Target, the folks that sell lawn and garden products and so on.
Well, so you really are redefining waste and the circular economy. It's just fascinating, from the idea and to now 23 years later. And your focus on eliminating the idea of waste is just fascinating. And I would love for you to share a little more about this vision, because you really are the leader, the category. You've brought the category that didn't exist to this.
Absolutely. I think, well, so the right way to begin is, let's take a step back, right? And really take a journey on what is waste, like what is the idea of waste, and where does it come from? I've had a chance to write a number of books on this topic, and what it always, again, in this weirdness, garbage is filled with really weird anomalies, right? So if we start with the idea of waste, the first thing is it doesn't exist in nature. Now, that's not to say that animals and plants and organisms don't have outputs. They certainly do, right? Let's take an example of, a chipmunk, right? It has the carbon dioxide it exhales. It has the stuff it puts in a toilet. And then it has, during its life, body parts, and then the body itself at the end of its life. Those would be its outputs. And these outputs are useless to the chipmunk and or any other chipmunk. If they ingested those outputs, it would be, devastating, right? But they are not useless to other organisms. They are useful to other things that then, ingest them, and that creates that whole circle of life, right? So in nature, organisms have outputs that are useless to themselves, but useful to other organisms. So another way to define the modern idea of waste is that it's an output that's useless to us, so useless, we're going to pay someone to get rid of it, but also useless to anything else. That's why it accumulates and creates all these problems and is misunderstood by nature. That's why a turtle will think a plastic bag floating in an ocean is a jellyfish, because it doesn't have the concept of waste, in its mind. So that's one way to think about it. So if that is the case, garbage is a useless output to the generator, humans, and useless to anything else, then when did that come to be? And this is another crazy thing. It's very young as a concept. It was invented and really came onto the scene in the 1950s. So there's people alive today that lived before the concept of garbage came onto the scene. And what were those two things that in the 1950s, became really big? Is complex materials came onto the scene, Remember, in the 1940s, the chair you and I'd be sitting on right now would have been made from wood. We could throw it in the forest and the forest wouldn't complain. It'd be nutrients to the forest. Today, the chair I'm sitting on and presume that anyone else sitting on is probably made from plastics and advanced materials. The clothing we would have worn in the 1940s and before would have been what? Cotton, wool, maybe silk. Today, 70% chance they're nylons and polyesters and synthetic materials. Now, it's not to vilify these synthetic materials. They've created phenomenal advancements, right? They've landed us on the moon to major health benefits, keep our food, safe longer, et cetera, et cetera. But nature doesn't have systems yet developed to digest them. And then we compounded this by really popularizing consumerism. That also came on to the 1950s. Today, an average person buys 10 times more stuff than someone alive 75 years ago. And here's like a striking stat. In the 1920s, so 100 years ago, we would have bought 2 apparel items per year and used them for 20 years. The concept of mending, darning our sock, cobbling our shoe were all popular. Today, those concepts don't exist anymore. And we buy 66 apparel items per year and wear them on average 3 times before disposal. And it's just, and that's in every category. Yeah. The volume has exploded and so has the velocity at the same time. And that's not even accounting for a 10-fold increase in population, right? And that is, the overall recipe for how it came onto the scene. Now,
sorry, go ahead.
No.
I was just thinking the resistance, like when you're getting going, like the behavior, the biggest barrier, whether it be consumer behavior, corporate resistance, system issues to making the circular economy. I mean, mainstream. I mean, you tell me a little bit about that. Yeah. I'm sure what you're trying to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think let's jump from where we were just at, which is this whole thing came onto the scene. And so the question to ask to understand the resistance or how to solve it is why did it win? Because we vote for this system all day long. We vote for it by buying into it, right? Which I think, by the way, is the most fiercely democratic decision we cast every day is what we buy and what we don't buy. It's not governed by, are we citizens? Are we a certain age? Do we not have, maybe a conviction in our past? And all of us vote for the future we want with how we purchase and how we don't purchase. So we are voting for the system constantly.
I love that. I love that you say that. I have a 15-year-old daughter, and her actual desire, talking about tweens or whatever that consumer is, she is dictating the future. Oh, yeah. That is just nothing that I could even imagine with the organic, the level of awareness. So, and I'll stop there. I sort of interrupted, but I'm hoping I'm adding to what you are part of this movement. So.
Yeah, I mean, amen, right? Like that is what creates the shift. And the way to think about that is next time any one of us are shopping, right? Whatever we buy, 2 more will appear tomorrow. 1 to replace the one we bought and 1 to signify the trend. And anything we don't buy, 1 less will appear tomorrow because there's nothing to replace, but there is a negative trend to signify. It's that powerful, like crazy, crazy powerful. And here's the nutty part about it is we're doing it whether we're conscious of it or not. So let's just be eyes wide open. Shop, but shop in a way that you realize that you are voting for more things to exist and less things to exist with what we buy. And not buying is an active vote, right? It's not just purchasing is an active vote. Not purchasing is also an active vote. Now, with that said, right, to answer your question, all of this, I think, is winning hard because it brings about, first and foremost, convenience. And it's not just convenience for us as consumers, which is what everyone always talks about. The silent convenience, which goes to then the resistance you're asking, is also to the stakeholders, the companies that facilitate this, the manufacturers, the retailers. They also want convenience. I believe in this sort of philosophy of like water flows downhill, right? And in the world of commerce, water flows towards simple profit. So for consumer, that means cheap and convenient. For companies, it means do the least amount of work and make the most amount of money, right? That's the way it naturally will flow. So for example, imagine if you were a milk company back in the 1930s and you had a milkman doing milk deliveries and you had to deliver it in these durable bottles and then you had to pick up those used bottles, clean them and refill them. How much easier is it that you just move to a disposable package? Suddenly that entire second part of the supply chain, picking up the empty bottles and cleaning them, evaporates. And it's no longer nothing to do with you anymore. That's really convenient. Also, you could then move to much cheaper packaging. Instead of a durable glass bottle that has to be built to be resistant to many, many cycles, you put it into a plastic bottle, then later a carton. Or in countries like Canada, milk comes in a pouch, right? And that not only makes it easier, but more profitable. Because what's the progression of these packages is cheaper, 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 and cheaper, right? Which makes your business more profitable. And that is the sort of overall trend at the moment. I think then when you say what's the resistance, the biggest challenge in all sustainability work, if you're trying to affect businesses, it basically boils down to this. Whether you care about garbage like I do or something else, let's say maybe the fact that we're living through a mass extinction or climate change, or pick whatever environmental trauma that we're living through, because they're all being expressed simultaneously. We would go into a stakeholder like a company and say, you have this externality, right? Please be responsible for this externality and pay money for it, right? That's the general ask. And that's difficult because there's no law forcing the company to be responsible for that externality. So by doing so, they're going to become less profitable. That's making the water go uphill, which is not its nature. So the trick to it, the biggest lesson we learned, is we have to frame investing in an externality, like investing in, say, making your object recyclable when it wasn't before. How will that help you win market share or do things that is the day-to-day job of the business? So a very concrete example of this, if we created diaper recycling over a decade ago. And diapers are a phenomenal waste stream. They make up 3% of landfills, right? And let's remember, it's half children and half adults, right? Adult incontinence is a massive contributor to diaper waste. But anyway, so it's a big environmental issue. But if we go to a company, let's say a Huggies or a Pampers or whatever, and say, you can fund the solution to this, meaning then also that the bigger the solution, the more you have to pay, that's going to be a difficult pill to swallow. But if we go instead and say, hey, if you fund diaper recycling, you can win market share from your competitor and get parents to want to buy whatever Pampers over Huggies or vice versa, then they go, wait a minute, we would love to do good because people are generally good. And you're helping us do good and fulfill our core goal of why we are hired to work at this company, to make it win. That's how you get these things implemented and really scaled. And that was a very tough lesson to learn early on.
So what was your first area that you kind of as a corporate kind of diapers, or where was that aha moment, that product market fit from a large scale?
Yeah, if we go, first 5 years of TerraCycle were worm poop, right? Basically worm poop in a soda bottle. And we were a consumer product company, and that was our business. And the twist was that we happened to make our products entirely from waste. What we realized in that journey, and we realized this by the time we got to about, say, 5 million in revenue. So we weren't tiny, it was some, validation there. We realized that if we're a consumer product company, the product is our business hero. And that means we're going to want to make the very best product, which intrinsically means we're going to want to pick the very best of the garbage. And that meant we started getting very selective on what type of garbage we picked. We would take certain organic waste to feed the worms, but not other. We would take certain used soda bottles, but not ones maybe that were crushed, or damaged in a way that, wouldn't look good on shelf. And we hit this stark realization that we couldn't possibly get to our mission of eliminating the idea of waste this way, because we're only picking the very best of the garbage. And so we completely restructured the business over about a 1 year period. We turned off the worm poop business in full and refocused on making the garbage the hero of our business model. And the first real question, to answer there was, why is some type of garbage, like a paper box or an aluminum can, recyclable, and 95% of everything else, from our toothbrushes to our eyeglasses and to our juice pouches, not recyclable? And what we realized is that it doesn't have to do with the technical ability to recycle something. That is a factor, but it's not the real issue. The real issue is what makes something recyclable is whether a garbage company can make money. That's it, in fact. So what's special about an aluminum can in a paper box is that it's profitable to recycle. And what is not special about everything else is that it's not profitable to recycle. And that led to, well, wait a minute, then all we have to do is get someone to pay for it. Because if someone's willing to pay what it really costs to collect and process some type of waste, then anything can be collected and recycled. And that was that sort of aha moment that unlocked the transition to what we are today.
I love this. You're really almost like a marketplace. You created a real marketplace for stuff that didn't have a price. And because your innovation, your principle, first principle, really working hard on this problem, that's just fascinating. I don't want to I don't want to kind of go off a topic, but I'm just thinking kind of side notes, certain things that are out there, whether it be solar panels or whether it be healthcare, different industries. What gets you super excited right now? Maybe you can't share some of these skunk work product, like,
Sure.
you know, I'm sure you're looking at this marketplace of junk as your treasure, creating new marketplaces. Can you share a little bit about that?
So to me, what's really exciting, I mean, it's sorry, there's an irony to the excitement. Everything in the world becomes waste, right? That's really important. And so for us, anything is an opportunity. You know, we started really focused on consumer packaging because that's a huge component of what ends up as waste in our oceans and informally disposed and so on. What we've been doing over the past, 5 years, the real sort of focus points has been really trying to go for as wide a range as possible for solutions, not just in packaging, but in objects, from bicycle helmets to wetsuits, from paint supplies to PPE and so on and so forth. But then also really to open up the B2B category. We're now half B2B, half B2C, because there's all this waste that we don't even realize exists. When we buy an apple at a supermarket, we may think that that is a zero waste purchase, right? Because let's say we just buy the apple with no bag or anything. But the amount of agricultural waste that is in the wake of that apple's existence is massive, from the fertilizer containers and all the consumables in a farm to the agricultural film, to the shipping crates, to the, I mean, you name it, it just goes on and on and on. And most of these things don't have any recycling solution.
Tom, I feel like I feel like you're a AI data company from start to source, the knowledge, the insight that you have. You're almost got an analytics arm of your company.
What we do, we do have a whole insights and analytics department and think about these sort of concepts. But you get to what's fun about our roles is that you can see the whole supply chain, for every object in its existence. And then it's about where can we bring and create investment to solve things, right? The other sort of key area that we're really excited about is how to shift not just from a recycling-based circular economy, where you take, say, this cup, it goes into a recycling solution where you shred it, melt it, say, into plastic. That would look something like these little granules at the end. And then you reform that, say, back into a cup or some other object, but into a reuse-based circular economy where this just gets cleaned, refilled, and around it goes again. Sort of like what it was, before the 50s. And this is our platform Loop. It's been a really interesting journey. It's been our biggest investment so far. We've put about, just under $50 million into it, just now finally becoming profitable. And interestingly, it's been France. That's been the country that has been, that really has moved it now to industrial scale. Today in France, you can walk into, most major supermarkets, see hundreds of products from beverages to food, home care, personal care, you name it, in fully reusable vessels that when you buy, you just pay a deposit. Then when you're done, you drop it off at any retailer. We refund your deposits in full. Then from there, the packaging is professionally sorted, cleaned, and refilled and goes right back onto shelf. That effectively eliminating the concept of waste, because the package never becomes garbage, right? At the end of its life, whenever after many, many uses, it's no longer able to be reused, it just gets recycled back into itself and then continues the journey again.
Do you see areas, different states that would be open to innovative experiments, where there's communities like to adopt what you have? And where do you see that in America, I guess, as a beachhead for that kind of thing?
It's so interesting. So we, for Loop, ran pilots in Canada, US, UK, France, and Japan. And it's been France that has been the one that has really taken off. So the question was why? And the reality is that it required a regulatory context. both carrots and sticks from a regulatory point of view. So what does France have that, say, doesn't exist in the US today? It has laws that are saying supermarkets of a certain scale must dedicate a certain amount of their shelf space to reusable offerings. That for France, I think is between 5 and 10% by 2027, which is mandating that this must happen. But then it also gives carrots. It gives major subsidies. Today, 75% of the costs are subsidized through this regulation, which allows it to go from embryonic scale up onto really large scale, which then becomes competitive and doesn't require subsidies anymore. That is the catalyst for these sort of things. And what it really gets to is for companies to internalize their externalities, regulation is an incredibly important tool. And let's be conscious that deregulation does the exact opposite, right? Now, in the US, to answer your question, where could this come? I don't think there is going to be federal appetite for this type of regulatory framework anytime soon, but there is appetite at a state level. Mm-hmm. We are seeing states like California, Oregon, Maine, for the first time in American history, pass extended producer responsibility regulation, which basically taxes producers to pay for recycling of their objects. This starts with packaging, typically. I think that's up in now just under half a dozen states, and you will see that come, state by state. Some of these states, like California, also are putting in reuse mandates into this regulatory capability, and that is also then going to create that type of atmosphere that we see in France. And it's sort of an interesting point, like, free markets are phenomenal for innovation. I'm a capitalist, and I think free markets allow, for movement of goods, for innovation, for all these things to occur, right? And I mean free markets in all ways, right? So no trade tariffs, no regulations. That allows for the best amount of movement. It's the best petri dish. However, when we make things or create things, there are externalities of our creation. The AI industry has a massive externality of energy and all the carbon it uses up. Producers have the externalities of farming and mining and converting forest into those types of applications. Not only the disruption on, flora and fauna, but all the other energy externalities that come from that. And the problem today is we don't have to deal with these externalities. We are not responsible for them. They effectively are passed to future generations to at some point contend with. And I think that is a really appropriate tool for regulation, so that we are not passing a debt to our children and their children. It should be that when we create harm, we have to somehow solve for that harm in the same breath. And that is, I think, a really useful tool for regulation and wouldn't necessarily harm the concept of innovation and what free markets are all about. It would just effectively embed the true cost of our actions into the object today versus make the object unnaturally cheap and then burden future generations with paying for the problem that it created.
I would love to bring up kind of your leadership, your purpose-driven business, and how you've, the payoffs, when you're really looking at your company's global. You've been around for 23 years. You earlier mentioned about, it's not just about profits. How do you balance that to make a sustainable business, with your vision of doing what you do?
Yeah. I think there's two components. How do we do it internally? And then how do we do it with our stakeholders, right? And I think these are different. Internally, we are very much in our core a mission-driven business. Now, you can define that many different ways. So the way I define it is everything we do must further our mission to eliminate the idea of waste. As a result, many people have asked us, like, do we have a internal sustainability department? And we don't, because the only thing we do is sustainability and moving towards a more circular economy. Profit for us, and that's a really key sort of tension typically between purpose and profit, we view as an indicator of health, which means we must be profitable, right? We've been profitable since 2015, and we will always make sure we finish profitable. But then the key question, I think, is not finishing healthy. I think that's a necessity. And look at a lot of the amazing, more larger sustainability companies, ones that have gone public, like Beyond Meat or Oatly or Rent the Runway or ThredUp. One of the challenges all these companies have is they've never been profitable. right? And so we really focus on, we must be profitable. But then the question is, what do you do with the profit? I think is a key is a key sort of form of purpose. The vast majority of what we do is reinvested into new innovation. It's why we've been able to deploy $50 million into Loop. I could have dividended that to myself and shareholders, right? I've never had a dividend in my life. And instead, it's all put back into more innovation so that we can create new models and new forms of circularity. With that said, we do have to give a return to our investors, and the way we are looking to do that is through an exit at some point. Maybe a larger company acquires us, or we go public, and that creates then the fiscal benefit for why it was worth investing in us in the first place.
I just love how you've been able to balance that. I mean, I think that's a huge story of your success, the profitability. And it's hard to imagine, before Jeff Bezos, I hate to just name drop, but, with everyone thought Amazon, it's like 15 years in, and I don't know, it's like Uber, these companies sort of, but it seems like that is in some sense your superpower. Obviously you have shareholders, you have investors that want to pay back. But you've delivered that success. That must be very challenging for you to balance those, negotiate and keep your vision.
Yeah, I think that goes to the other component, right, of purpose, mission-driven businesses, is how do you do that with your customers, right? And so here's an interesting question we asked ourselves early on, like, are there customers we shouldn't work with, right? Do we want to have an opinion on the customer? And we realized that every object's existence in the world has externalities, right? Now we could probably all agree that cigarettes are bad, right? And they're bad because they have externalities. Mostly, these are linked to human health and then all the litter they produce. But frankly, so does every object's existence. So does even organic yogurt have externalities. You have the methane from the cows, that is produced. The food waste, the packaging may not be recyclable, right? Even something as sort of wonderful feeling like organic yogurt. So our answer was, we're not going to make an opinion, but we will only do one thing with companies, which is if they're willing to invest in internalizing their externality of waste, whether it's a tobacco company funding cigarette recycling or a yogurt company funding recycling for the packaging of their yogurt, we view those as equal, as long as that is what they're willing to put their money into. And we wouldn't provide any other service other than, let's collect and recycle things that are not recyclable, help them make their things from recycled material, or move them fully to reusables.
I'd love to hear, is there, as you've been coming along, is there a great business leader or businesses that you've really used as a reference point? I mean, I know you're a category in yourself, a visionary leader, but is there any ones that you've kind of referenced as you've set your standards through these 23 years?
So for me, the people whose shoulders I stand on, and I really mean this deeply, is the generation of social entrepreneurs that came before me. These are the guys who started their companies in the 70s, folks like Gary, who started Stonyfield Yogurt, or Seth, who started Honest Kids, all the way to Ben and Jerry, who started, their ice cream company, and John, for example, who started Seventh Generation. A lot of these are consumer good companies because that was the mode back in that time. But they really started the movement of social business and purposeful business. And what's been nice is, and this community is still very small, right? So I've been able to become friends with most of these folks, and they really helped in the early days through mentorship, guidance, but also having somewhat paved the way for organizations like TerraCycle to come onto the scene. They're the ones who, again, we stand on their shoulders of, and hopefully as the next generation comes, they'll be standing on our shoulders and being able to do even more profound solutions, leveraging business to help make the planet somewhat better.
Tom, I'm so glad you've come on here and shared what you're doing. It's really exceptional, and I see a long future for you as well. Obviously, you need to exit at some point, or what you have things that you need to work, concerns. But tell me more, like as we're kind of wrapping up. I'd love to see or hear your vision as you see the future for TerraCycle, and just sort of the stuff that's getting you excited, because you're still. You're still super young. I know you're still up to doing big and bold things.
Absolutely. Yeah. We, are envision ourselves as sort of the, Google of garbage, if you will. Not quite at that scale yet, but that's where we want to aspire to go. to try to become the most innovative waste management, circular economy company in the world, constantly challenging and bringing out new models on how we interact with waste, with a hope that we can eliminate the very idea of it, noting it's a very modern and nominalist idea. This is what has created a lifelong passion for us and all of our team members, and it's something that we really look forward to continuing to do. And what's nice is with the tools of business, the growth can really be logarithmic, right? As you become bigger, it's easier to become even bigger, and to be able to then take all that resource and invest it into developing new bold ideas, like we did a number of years ago on Loop, and what may come up in the future as well.
Do you see yourself investing in companies at this point to keep your vision? Are you on an eye on doing any mergers or acquisitions or
Yeah,
partnerships?
we've acquired 4 companies so far. So we have appetite for mergers and acquisitions, and we've done about one a year. What we've acquired so far are wonderful companies with long track records that have been doing specific specialty recycling. Like you mentioned, solar panels, one of them is doing solar panel recycling, another one focused on dismantling of e-waste, another one focused on light bulb recycling. So it's something that we have great appetite for, and like I said, we've done 4, and we look forward to doing more. Probably, another one, just not later this year, early next.
Well, as we're wrapping it up, is there anything else you'd like to share with our audience?
Yeah, I think, look, the biggest thing I would say is if you care about these topics of sustainability, um, I'll give sort of 2 points of advice. One as an individual, and one as if you want to sort of drive sustainability through business. As an individual, let's remember we vote for the future with what we buy and what we don't buy. We're doing it anyway, so let's just be eyes wide open about it. And then if you want to be in the business of sustainability, the idea that we have to serve the stakeholder that we are asking to invest in some form, in some method, whether it's buy a product, buy a service, make sure that service or product really fulfills their core goals. And the right way to test for that is if you divorce the entire sustainability concept away, would there still be a reason to move forward?
And the last thing, what can people do? What would you recommend to me, an individual, just to become more literate, more involved in this movement you are as an individual?
I mean, directly with TerraCycle, what you can do is go to our website, TerraCycle.com. You'll find first a lot of free programs. Check those out. These are programs designed to be able to collect and recycle specific waste streams absolutely for free. You even can raise some money for a school or charity of your choice. We've given away close to $50 million in this method in our history. There's also paid solutions. So if there's not a free solution available, have a look at some of the paid solutions. And that's something you can do directly with us. Otherwise, be an active consumer and think about how to spend your day job in helping the planet be better.
Well, Tom, this has been really awesome. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a real pleasure.